Welcome to the You Go First podcast. This is the place where we bring together thought leaders, business pioneers, personal development gurus, and just about any person we discover that will inspire and compel you to go first in all areas of your life. Please welcome keynote speaker, philanthropist, and the official head dream chaser for Odyssey Teams, Inc., our host, Lane Hensley.
All right, here we are back at another episode of You Go First. I got my good friend Alex Van Dewark. Alex, you go first.
No, you go first. You go first.
So here we are. You go first. I will go first. So I'm your host, Lane Hensley, one of the owners of Odyssey Teams, and we started YouGoFirst.live a while back because I had so many people around my life that have inspired me, helped me really grow as a person, as a leader, as a speaker, and all that good stuff. And I have invited a friend of mine here. I'll tell you, his name is Alex Van Dewark. He is a fireman. So Alex, congratulations. Thanks for being here today.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. Honestly, I just want to start by, I can't think of a higher compliment than to be asked to be here, man. So thank you.
Nice
Seriously.
Here,
I mean that. I'm really honored to be here. Thanks.
A little history on Alex. So thank you. I appreciate that so much. But I met Alex when he was a junior in high school. You were at our leadership camp, Camp Royal. Just another kid in 150 selected out of Northern California. And you were a leader among leaders at that time. We lost contact. And then I met you again when you were at Chico State here in Chico. And you're now married. You have a child and another one on the way. So congrats on that.
Thanks. One beautiful daughter and another beautiful daughter on the way. And 1 month. And a beautiful wife, yes.
Yes, okay, good.
Yes, yeah. My beautiful wife made those two beautiful daughters.
Yes. So, but Alex is a fireman. He drives a few hours down to Vacaville, California. And in the spirit of You Go First, you know, I knew you when you were a paramedic, and you were one of the youngest paramedics in Butte County. And I want you to be here today because I want our listeners to learn about the perspective of a fireman. So, you know, we're talking about how do we get people to be unstuck in their life, whether that's a bad behavior and a bad relationship or a job or some performance level at work and stuff. But, you know, you are a crisis fighter. I mean, you're there when people's houses are on fire. You're there when their life is in shambles. You're there when physically they're injured or a relationship is reached a point where somebody calls 911 and you show up. So I'm hoping today our listeners can really get a sense from you of, you know, what does it take to maybe perform well in those situations if you're a person around it? What does it feel like to be the one that's everybody's looking to for that as a young guy who's, you know, trying to save people in really, really difficult times? So let's start with this simple question, which is, what is the meaning of life? No.
I'm glad you asked that.
You know, let's start with really just like, what is it like to be a fireman? What inspired you to be a fireman? And then we'll get into just kind of what it feels like when the crises are happening and how can people be better in those points in their life.
Sure.
And when we're in it. But what inspired you? What do you love about the job?
Well, I love a lot about it, and we'll get into that through answering a lot of those questions and kind of diving into that. But I can start by saying, I remember pretty clearly having a strong resistance to being in the fire service. My mom, probably when I thought I knew everything as a teenager, you know, she said, hey, you know, high school's coming to an end. And like you said, that was a time when I was involved in some leadership stuff, and you and I had first met. And she said, I think you should look into maybe becoming, you know, part of the fire service. And I thought, I don't want to do that. And I think, I don't know why I thought that, because obviously I've been doing this for over a decade. Yeah. And I think, at the time, I must have just been resisting my parents' direction, which is so silly. But she knew, she could tell there was something inside of me that would resonate with this type of field based on her experience. And so, long story short, jumping ahead a few years, you know, we had some family connections to other people in the fire service, and no one in my family is part of the emergency services of any kind. So I went on a ride-along, and this particular ride-along was with a guy named Cliff Campbell, and he... I'm not sure what their department policies were at the time, but he let me.
Sorry, Cliff.
Yes.
You have to say his last name?
Yeah, well, that's all right. He would be pumped on, you know, being, but I went on a ride along, and I had no experience. I was 18 years old, and we went to a fire, and I don't even have all my equipment and all this stuff, just kind of hodgepodge stuff that they gave me and said, hey, wear this if we go on a call, right? And so we go, and it's just these, like, you know, like a pampas grass bushes or some sort of, it was like a bunch of these bushes all stacked together, and they were on fire. And we were coming up this court, and there was smoke everywhere. And I'm in the front, you know, shotgun seat, and he's driving this
Awesome.
rig, and we're driving code 3. This is the first time this has ever happened. It's just this very exciting thing, right?
Sure.
And we pull up, and there's smoke everywhere, and we kind of go past the smoke and see, okay, gosh, these bushes are on fire, and it's kind of, also very exciting. And he looks at me and goes, all right, go outside and grab the nozzle, and I'll give you some water. And I'm like, what? And I'm not going to, say the exact words that he said, because I don't think it's necessarily professional. But he basically said, what did I say? Get out, grab the nozzle, and go put some water on that fire. And I was like, oh, okay. So I just didn't expect that, type of I thought I'm a viewer, and he just let me get right involved. And from that moment, I grabbed this hose, and it was a real line. So it's basically like a fancy garden hose that we have, so now being a fireman, it's kind of funny. It's not like that big of a deal, but I pulled it in, and I was right there putting this fire out. And it was just the first snowball down a hill of, this is part of my DNA. I knew it right then and there. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, I think as leaders, we're drawn to emergency situations in some ways. And I think that could be a strength as a leader, where you're like constantly then looking for a fire, and you're like, micromanaging people's business all the time. But I think I like what you said about it's in our DNA in your DNA, where you're like, I really like not just maybe the adrenaline of those emergency situations, but being a person. And I've seen you be super calm in really stressful situations. So now let's flash to the back when you were a paramedic, and maybe, storytelling is part of this for sure, around, stories of, either people really in need physically, or funny stories, or just give us a couple stories that stand out in your mind when it comes to like things that you experienced as a fireman.
Well, I think, so initially I became a paramedic and worked for many years as a paramedic here in Butte County. And now I work for the Vacaville Fire Department. I'm still a paramedic. I work as a firefighter paramedic. What's an interesting story that I think would be fun to expand on, that actually just happened, but is something that has been kind of sprinkled out through my career, is we got a call for a lady having trouble breathing, and it was in a very rural area of Vacaville. So we go up to this area, and I was on the ambulance this day, so I was basically acting strictly as a paramedic, and we get out there, and there's all volunteer firefighters. I'm the only paramedic it's seen. Everyone's kind of looking at me, and as soon as we show up, this woman went from trouble breathing to what we call coding. She died right there. And so we do our thing, we do CPR, we get her back, and she was just a really, really difficult patient to manage. And I ended up having to kind of make some really integral decisions, because our protocol says if you bring back someone from life, and I'm sort of paraphrasing to keep it in layman's terms, but if you bring someone back from being dead, you have to do certain things, and you have to go to a certain hospital, etc. And it wasn't working out, because she was a very difficult airway to manage, and there was a lot of stuff. And basically, the S was hitting the fan, if I can say that. It was like everything was going wrong, and then it kept getting worse. And it was just like, okay, we're doing everything to take care of her. And so I ended up breaking protocols and changing decisions and going to different facilities and all this kind of stuff, because I just thought it was right. And then several days ago, I'm on duty, and we get a knock at the front door of the station, and this woman says, hi, I'm looking for Alex. And my first, I don't know why I have some sort of guilty conscience, my first reaction was, oh boy, I'm in trouble. Like,
everybody has that.
I'm like, okay. Yeah, well, let's see, which Alex are you looking for? What did he, or what did he do or not do? Yeah. So I said, oh, well, I'm Alex. And she goes, hi, I'm the woman whose life you saved.
Wow.
And it's kind of, it's crazy, because a lot of times we do a lot of stuff, and we do a lot of good, but we don't get to see a person walk and say, hey, I baked you some cookies. Thanks for saving my life. So some of those kind of moments are some of my favorite, integral moments in sort of taking from the day that I was on that first fire, and then sort of fueling through your career of like, why do we keep doing what we're doing? It's because every once in a while things line up, and you can really affect, someone's life. So it's pretty cool. Yeah.
Well, I feel your emotion.
Yeah.
On that.
Sorry, I got worked up.
No, that's all right. I mean, because, because that's what this is about. I mean, when people like you were saying, she wasn't that easy of a patient when she was in crisis.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times when we're going first for people, they sometimes resist when we're trying to help them. And it's a great feeling when people come back and they really are grounded and go, "Hey, you saved my life. You know, you showed me or taught me something I didn't want to learn, but I learned it." And it brings to mind the tragic stories. I'm sure you're around when people are, in tough situations. I'm sure you've seen people who have died or been a part of those things. So, how do you get through that with your fellow firefighters, paramedics, it's, I'm sure, a very difficult part. And do any stories stand out to you of been the hardest to deal with?
Yeah, I would say I'm a new dad, as you mentioned, and so some of the there's been I could spend some time on some pretty tragic stuff, but I would say most recently the things that have affected me that have been challenging to deal with. Like how do we deal with it? Well, me as a person, my crew, our industry, we're continuing to get better at it. We're not always the best. The history of it would be compartmentalizing all of the stuff. And a lot of people take it out on, abusing alcohol or, very unhealthy ways. And so there's been a lot of science and a lot of energy in our industry going into peer support and counseling and, figuring out what is the best way to deal with some of that stuff. And, as an example, like I said, I'm a new dad. So things with kids really, I don't know, there must be something biological about it because it just affects me to see and to deal with some of that stuff in a different way than probably before I was a father. I've taken daughters off of their dads who are doing CPR, doing the best they can. A little teenage daughter. I'm just looking at you and you're, so it's, a lot of times it is, like you said earlier, you just have to bring calm to chaos, and then we deal with it later. And that's the differentiation between a really great emergency responder and a not so great one. And it is hard sometimes, that's a one occasion that stands out to me. I actually had to pull a 16-year-old girl off of her father doing CPR. And, there was a time when Lindsay, my wife, was pregnant, and she was about 5 months pregnant. We ran a call on a woman who was normal health, it's almost the same age, 5 months pregnant. She walked across the street, collapsed, and we did CPR on her. And the outcome wasn't so great. We saved her life, but the baby died. And and it was just like, it's so, what do we do to manage it the best we can? We I think are building a culture of really getting things out, talking to people you trust, your crew, and kind of really having good debriefing sessions. It's a little more crass and a little bit more, vulgar than what normal people would, have a debriefing session. It's a lot more of that type of sense of humor. We have a very dirty, dark sense of humor, but that's just the way that's the filter in which we process those really intense emotions a lot of times. Yeah. And so that's kind of the best that we can do,
Yeah. Well, in the spirit of you go first, it's like, you're going first to be in those situations. You're choosing a job that's going to put you on the front lines of people. And, people don't always know, why are firemen showing up for this? Nothing's on fire. And you get the first call. It's a 911. It's boom, fire, because there's so many fire stations all over the place. So, you're in domestic disputes, you're in a house on fire, you're in car accidents, you're in somebody with just chest pain and so forth, right? And I feel a bit of emotion because it's fun to see you in your uniform. My father-in-law's a fireman. Yeah. He just turned 90, he's got cancer. It's like, it's interesting to know. And I hear stories he tells about being involved in earthquakes in San Francisco. He was an Oakland fireman, in on a collapse of a bridge and, extricating people from these massive situations. And, I wanted you here because I remember stories you would tell when you were 20 years old, and you're drilling a hole into somebody's bone to try to pump medications in. And I was just like, wow, I was so proud of you, knowing you from a high school kid to now making life and death decisions for people, being the one that you show up on scene and everybody's looking to you to go, what should we do? And what do they call that when you're primary person everybody's turning to?
Well, I mean, it depends on what context, but yeah, you're the highest level of authority at a scene, or you're the incident commander, or you know what have. There's a number of different terms depending on what kind of scene you're at, but basically you're the highest level of medical authority. So if there's EMTs or even if there's doctors at scene, I mean, pretty much a paramedic is in charge of any medical emergency.
What if there's a motivational speaker on scene?
Yeah, actually, we have a special clause in the code where they actually supersede our training, because of leadership and decision making, obviously.
We joke we want to make a video someday around that where
That's right.
a doctor and a fire. I'm a motivational speaker. Oh, well, thank you. I'm glad you're
Thank goodness someone's here finally that can help us mitigate
time
this.
when motivation isn't enough. Like people need help and you're providing that help. But, in the spirit of just behaviors, what do you see? How could people prepare for a crisis situation, whether that's you don't have to make it parallel to work or business or anything like that, but just, what are things, because I think behaviors are behaviors, whether you're at work or, your house is on fire. So what are behaviors you think people need to either tap into or have, or I don't know, help us understand?
That's such a great question. Off the top of my head, I think the first thing is it's a mindset. I want to encourage all of your listeners that if I can be a firefighter paramedic for over a decade, then you can, in a sense of an emergency. You may not have any training or skills or whatever, but there's going to be a time where there's going to be some version of some emergency at least once in every person's life. And if you have the mindset of, I'm not prepared to handle emergency, or I'm not, the negative sort of like, then your reflex is going to be to shy away or to not be able to do what you innately are capable of doing. And I want to encourage the people who are listening to know that, like, by switching that mindset and by knowing, like, in a moment, whether it's doing CPR on a stranger or whether it's helping mitigate some mass school shooting, which is unfortunately all too common, you don't need to look left or look right to see who's going to be the person fixing the problem. You are the person. It's you. It's time to go first, more than ever, to do anything that comes naturally to you within your common sense or your reaction to fix the problem, And so I think just having that mindset of, if an emergency happens of any kind, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to do something. I think a lot of people don't have that approach, because I get that a lot. Like, I could never do what you do. And it's like, yeah, you could. I do it. You could do it. Everyone can do it, because at some point in history, there was no fire service. There was no paramedics. There was just emergencies, and people just did what they could do. Right. And so, and we're all still here. So,
well, when I think about, what are the majority of calls? I know that there's, we're in California, there's a lot of talk about the homelessness and people in drug and alcohol abuse situations or mental illness and so forth. And, this isn't a political show, but this is a show about just people and like trends that we see, and knowing that we're all in those situations. What are some of the things that you do to help people that are in those kinds of crisis situations? Or
well, it depends on what is going on. I mean, in the moment, fixing whatever is a life threat obviously is the key. So if there's some sort of drug and alcohol thing that is to the extent that someone's life is in danger, that's our first priority. And then we may not get down the road to really fix the problem, or, like really address, something to help these people. But, there are systems in place. They're not the best, but there are systems in place with social work and other stuff where we can kind of bridge the gap between someone who's a bum or junkie on the street and getting them the actual assistance, programs, help that they need. But we're mostly wrapped up in just responding to the ones who are overdosed on heroin or what have you. So we don't, unfortunately, I see a lot of the results of what our society has created, and again, like you said, we don't want to get
whatever created that.
Whatever. There's a number of individual circumstances and societal circumstances that have created a lot of homelessness issues, and some people are truly victim, and some people are making bad choices. And so, I see the results of all those things, but unfortunately it's a hard feeling to feel a little powerless. There's not much I can do other than address the immediate stuff, if there is any, and transport someone to the hospital.
When you go on scene, like what's your priorities? Just teach us about, if I want to be a fireman and I show up on the scene, I would have no idea, like, what do I look for first? How do you assess
the biggest thing nowadays, first right out of the gate, is scene safety. So, I mean, we get a lot of training in a variety of different fashions on how to assess whether a scene is safe, but ultimately it's common sense. You know, if you're approaching, just like you're walking on the street, whether you're by yourself or with your family, if the hair on the back of your neck is sticking up because you see someone that's concerning to you or whatever, that's scene safety, right? So we go, if there's something that we're seeing, you know, whether it's a vehicle that looks unstable, we're not going to walk towards that vehicle and rescue someone until we feel like we can stabilize it, because I can't get crushed, then I'm no good. Or violence wise, obviously, if there's something that is a potential threat or whatever. So number one priority is always scene safety. And then it's getting into establishing, okay, how many people are here that are injured and what's the extent? So in a mass casualty thing, a accident on the street or something, you really have to decide, okay, how many people do we have that need what type of care? But in a typical emergency, it's like a one person thing. You know, my dad's having a heart attack or someone got shot or whatever. So then it would be jumping into, you know, really it's kind of silly, but the ABCs: airway, breathing, circulation. So we, you know, as I'm coming up to you, no matter what your emergency is, whether it's a panic attack or you're shot, you know, or somewhere in between there.
Those seem pretty extreme, but I understand.
There's sides of the spectrum, maybe. Okay. But we get it all, right? Yeah. So I got to establish within, you know, as I'm walking up to you, the priority of like, okay, you're breathing. And I can tell you're breathing at a normal rate and at an adequate, you know, volume. So, okay, your airway, your breathing is already good to go. Do you look pale, like you don't have any blood circulation, or do you look like you have nice, you know, skin color and that kind of stuff? So I'm assessing those things as we walk up. And so all of us are going basically scene safety, the vital stuff, ABCs, and then we get into the meat of what we call differential diagnosis, you know, figuring out, okay, are you having pain? Are you having weakness? Have you been sick? What's going on? You know, really being kind of like I don't want to say the word detective, but that's kind of what we are in a lot of ways. We're trying to figure out what the rest of it is. But that stuff is, okay, now I've established whether we have time or not to talk about that stuff. And so the immediate things are those kind of first and foremost, you know? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, everybody, you know, when you think of firemen, you're just like these superheroes. You know, I see the hook and ladder go by. I always want to be the guy in the back and just know what that feels like to drive this vehicle and represent, you know, like help is here. You know, there's help is on the way and there's help is here. And I think everybody, when they see a fireman coming, there's this positive reaction like, okay, cool, this person is in charge. And I think something I want people to feel today is that behind the badge and behind the truck and behind the uniform are people who are making a choice to go toward it. And I think 9/11 was one of those things that just united everybody around. Wow, firemen are the ones. They're running up the stairs. Everybody's running down the stairs.
Yeah.
You know, you're going toward this person on the street that is acting erratically in a dangerous, thinking I can be safe in addressing the situation. Mm-hmm. How do you recover? I appreciate you being here because I know you worked all night last night and made your couple-hour drive home.
My pleasure.
And we had scheduled this, so you know, you're going home to your family. And how do you kind of cushion those two things, like you said, without proper coping mechanisms for the places we put ourselves in? I think this is an important question because as leaders, as someone who's out in business, you know, driving, and a person who's, you know, trying to have this big life, there's this time between, you know, that work and those stresses and the times when we want to be our best at home with our kids and our wives and our husbands and family. Mm-hmm. How do you know, any advice on how to cope with that transition?
Well, the way that I do it is my best, and my wife would hopefully say the same. But you know, the way I do it and the things that I do are things that you know doesn't take an emergency responder to need to do the same things, and you know, because people's stress is different and life's are relative, and so whether you're a person that works in the parks or whatever, it doesn't matter what you do. Everyone has some version of this where you have to harmonize your work and life and, you know, family balance. And I have it in my head that if I don't do everything I can possibly do to manage being understanding and calm and patient with my daughter, with my wife, with my family, even if I get off of the worst shift, which I'll be honest happens a lot. I mean, there'll be times where I just got done, last set was a perfect example. I paced someone, which means I took control of their heart because their heart was too slow. They were altered because of it. I ran a code on someone, they were dead. And I ran a code on another person. One of them lived while the other one didn't. And we ran 9 calls after midnight, and then I went home, and then to be home, it's like, hey, we got, the garbage cans need to go out. The house needs to get clean. There's lots of stuff going on at home while we're doing this. And obviously in my field, it's a little bit of there's maybe a bigger divide than some people because I have to really work hard to decompress myself.
The copy machine wasn't working and the proposal didn't go out.
Yeah, but you know what? Everything.
Coding people and.
Yeah. And so whatever version or divide you have within what you do for a living, we all need to have an approach on being understanding that at home something is going on, and that people that love you need you to love them and need your time, need your focus, need your energy. And honestly, it sounds kind of weird, but if I don't do it, I'm going to get divorced. If I don't do it, if I don't do it, I'm going to let my daughter down. I'm going to let my wife down. So I have those thoughts. The way that I accomplish it is on my drive home, I'm thinking, I'm just going to sip coffee, and I got to focus on getting my physiology and my mindset ready for whatever is going on at home. Whether it's like, Daddy, look at this drawing I made for you, and it's all happy and warm and fuzzy, or if it's a crisis at home, because sometimes that happens. And a lot of people in my industry have historically not been very good at that, and people in general. I mean, it doesn't take an emergency responder to not be good at coming home, and then this is a cause of resentment to have some sort of disconnect between, oh, you don't understand what I just went through, whatever it is, it's work stress or life stress. And so I think having a focus on putting that second and putting whatever's going on at home first is the way to accomplish kind of changing and being ready for that, in a healthy way.
Yeah. Well said. I know that, you're talking about choice and that intention and really focusing on, hey, I've got my work performance. I have a role I play at work, and I'm on scene, and I'm a human that's dealing with life and death situations, and I may have my own doubts, but I need to tell people, you go there and you go there, and they don't need to know that you're going, who should go where, and you just tell them, and
that happens a lot.
And then you get home, and I love appreciate that. The ultimate sort of crash and burn would be, like you said, I get a divorce, I don't get my, these are the things that motivate us to balance ourselves and not be reflexive about this transition. Knowing that, like I said, my father-in-law is 90 and he's still happily married to his wife of, 60 years kind of thing. And, what a great example of, how to separate these things and how, like you said, they're all blended together. And that's why I thought it was so important to have you on, because I think people who are watching or people who are listening understand that this is really a person that's got at least their head on I'm going to figure this out, and I'm going to keep being better at it. And that continuous learning that you exhibit from the day I met you as a high school student to then as a college student, as a paramedic, as now a good friend of mine, and somebody that I see you go off and put your life in jeopardy to be there for people and to see your family growing and all that stuff is so awesome.
Yeah, thanks.
I know your wife is a school teacher as well, so we have a firefighter school teacher, and you're a family. I mean, you're just like this quintessential sort of vision of, I think, what you imagined for yourself when I met you. What do you think are just any last sort of words about just what do you do to inspire or motivate yourself in your relationships with your coworkers? I mean, I imagine it's challenging. You guys are up all night, and the gals and guys are, in this like real tight culture of coping with these crises and stuff. How can other people who are first responders out there, what do you think is the key to being good at that part of the job?
I think being less critical of each other and really being introspective and forcing yourself to understand, like, first of all, we're all very experienced, but we're all beginners, because every call we run is different. And all the things we do, that's part of why we like doing it. It's always new, and it's always challenging, it's always exciting, and some, often it can be tragic and intense and emotional, but a lot of, for whatever reason, the people that are drawn to this industry are naturally hypercritical of everyone except for themselves. And I have discovered that about myself, that I am hypercritical when I should really be mostly critical of myself. And then hopefully that shift, if I could get into the ears of all of my peers, nationwide, anyone who's in the fire service or, I think that's something that we need to do better. And that would really, really, really make a big ripple in our pond, so to speak, of healthy culture of dealing with some of these things, is being less of an armchair quarterback and being less of a critical evaluator of everyone all the time, because that's what we do. It's odd human behavior. And I think it exists everywhere in all industries and all areas of life. But for some reason, in our area, it can be pretty crippling, and it can really affect people that are maybe on the brink of something in a very powerfully negative way. That just as a side note, there were more suicide deaths in the fire service last year than on line of duty deaths. So more of us are dying because we're killing ourselves instead of because we go try and rescue somebody in a fire. So the only reason I say that is because, it's really important for us to find ways to answer your question, and I think that's one way, is being more of an, like, what can I do to just understand? Because every call, some other station that's, you're hearing it all go down on the radio. We all listen to each other. And then what's our reaction? It's to critique and to, I would do this better or do this differently, or I can't believe he or she did that. And it's kind of like, why do we do that instead of, wow, how difficult must it have been to do this, and wow, how good did they do by, you know what I mean? And I don't know why in our culture it's rampant, but it is. So.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great place to end, is just, I think, in relationship of any kind, we have this reflexive need to assess and then critique instead of just, observe and learn. And without going to that, like, what I would have done, or vocalizing that, we can become, I always feel like, man, I'm so busy trying to be better at who I am. I barely have time to but we find the time. And so often we maybe insulate ourselves from our own assessment by filling our mind with our critiques of others. And that fulfills sort of that unconscious bias that we have maybe toward those people. And it doesn't allow them to change, doesn't allow us to change.
Yeah.
And we're just not good in the moments where we need to be good. When we
hit it on the head, I think. Yeah, totally.
Well, Alex, man, I'm just so proud to see you here, and I appreciate you coming and sharing some of your story. I know you have so many stories you've told me, around, just these, life and death situations that you're putting yourself in to try to be that hero for people. And I see the way you're showing up for your family, and I just can't wait to see your growing family and see what you do next with these skills that you've developed beyond as a fireman, but just as a person. And that's what this show is about. How do people develop the skills to go first, to look at themselves, to go first, to be in harm's way, go first, to find people in big need. And you're doing that every day, man. I know you're up late and all night last night. Thank you
I'm
so
doing my
much.
best.
Yeah. So with that, everybody out there listening, hey, thanks for sticking with Alex today and really hearing his story as a paramedic fireman. And it's an honor to be your friend.
Oh, likewise. It's an honor to be here and be your friend too, man.
Yeah, awesome. So good luck out there, everybody. You go first. There's no social media or anything for Alex, but we can probably find you on Facebook and things like that. But please, I hope you have some big compassion for those firemen and those paramedics and police and all the first responders out there who are living with those stressful day-to-day behaviors and then coming home and trying to be good at home as well. So thanks for those insights today, Alex.
Yeah, thanks. And anyone who's out there who's on the other side of it, just do your best to be patient with us. We're not always great at doing what we do. We're not always great at debriefing. And I think somewhere deep down, we all want to be good partners and good fathers and good mothers. And so, be patient with us.
Yeah, well said. All right, Alex, thanks for being here. Yeah.
Thanks for listening to another episode of You Go First. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you want to listen to another episode, you can find us at yougofirst.live, or you can see more about our host, Lane Hensley, on his Instagram at OneDreamChaser. To learn more about his company, Odyssey Teams Inc., go to odysseyteams.com or follow all their social media channels at Odyssey Teams. Thanks again, and we hope that you will go first to share our podcast with a friend or colleague. Now, you go first.